Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Emergency Home Learning Summit. Our guest today is Marley Richards. Welcome, Marley.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for being here. Okay, so tell us who you are.
Hey, so my name is Marley. I am a youth rights advocate, 16 years old right now, and I am basically just working to make sure that young people's voices are heard in education and that they are raised in confident autonomy. I work with Raising Free People Network as a consultant and have also been on the Fair the Free Child podcast a couple times.
So, what is self directed learning or self directed education?
So, self directed education is a school of thought that basically puts value on um, being self directed. And what I mean by self directed is that you're able to assert how you want to learn and what sort of things you're interested in and where you need support. I think when we talk about conventional school, like, K through 12, right, it's very much a top down authoritarian sort of thing. And what self directed education aims to do is to get rid of that idea that you need someone to teach you. How to learn basically and how to get to where you want to be, that you can take ownership of that and delegate as you need to, but that first and foremost is your experience of learning.
So, in the interview I listened to, the podcast interview, you talked
Mhm.
about self SDE minded, self directed education minded.
Yeah.
What does that phrase mean?
So when I say SDE minded, it does have to do with what I just described, feeling confident that you can do your own thing when it comes to how you want to learn and being able to communicate that to other people. So, an example, I think being SDE minded is somebody who, say, for example, I'm learning languages, right? Being SDE minded would mean that I can look into the tutors for myself. I can know what kind of tutor I want, but not feel like I have to have a tutor get to in order to get to where I want to be. It's a choice that I'm making for myself, not because I feel pressured. And I think that's the huge difference between the mind of someone who's been in conventional schooling, is what we call schoolishness, and a self-directed, SE minded person.
And SDE minded extends beyond traditional schooling years, right?
100%. I think being SDE minded is like a whole um, approach to life in a way.
So, a question I will ask people, a sort of a Socratic question,
Mhm.
is what percentage of high school students do they think graduate high school as independent adults? What do you think people reply?
Oh, um, I think I'm not sure. I think people would reply maybe like the majority of them, because we feel like school is supposed to prepare us for adulthood.
And so it turns out it's actually the opposite.
Mm,
That I think it means that people kind of understand that school doesn't really prepare people for independence.
mm. True. Very true.
So I think that goes along with your SDE minded. Uh, Talk about schoolishness. What does that mean?
Yes. So schoolishness is a term that I use to describe a mindset where, one that's raised in conventional school, in which you feel like you need an authority figure to tell you how to, like, tell you what your schedule looks like, tell you what you need to learn, how you need to learn it. At its core, it is very much feeling like you need an authority figure and you need that authority's approval at all times. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a person, it can be a group of people, it could even be a concept, like feeling like you want to go to college, but you need the acceptance of I don't know, some other people for the certain major that you want to go for. So schoolishness is just the mind that you need someone to accept what you're doing at all times and tell you how to do what it is you want to do. Sometimes not even what you want to do.
So are SDE minded and schoolishness kind of opposites?
I would say so. And I think SDE, the thing about being SDE minded is that it places a lot of value on trusting yourself as opposed to putting all your trust in another figure for how you want to learn, specifically, in the context of education, for how you want to learn. So I think they are opposites in that way, but the transition between them, if you are a schoolish minded person or an SDE minded person, then the transition between them isn't really like point A to point B. It's a really weird psychological back and forth.
So would you say that schoolishness also transcends age?
Definitely. Yes. I left conventional school when I was 8 years old. So I wasn't very entrenched in it. But to this day, I still have a lot of aspects of schoolishness that I deal with. And even as somebody who next year I would have been in self directed education the majority of my life, I'm still very much reeling from it.
Could you give us an example?
Sure. So I like to organize a lot. It's just how my mind works. I compartmentalize, and there's inherently nothing wrong with that. But back when I was in conventional school and a very schoolish minded person, there were only so many ways you could organize your day. Like if you had your schedule, then your schedule has to look like this, like hour to hour. What are you doing? And so, even when I came out of school and was working towards a more self directed approach, my idea of what a schedule looked like was still very schoolish, even though that didn't work for me. Currently, I do not schedule my day hour by hour. It's more so a task list, but I struggled getting to what really made me comfortable for a long time because I felt like I needed the approval of I don't even know. Like it feels like the approval of adults for me personally as to what I want my day to look like. Like my schedule has to be acceptable for other people when it's my schedule.
So the way we're talking about it, self SDE
Hmm.
minded seems far superior to schoolishness. But do people with different temperaments find themselves in different places on the spectrum?
Hmm. I think that's a really interesting question. I think that just the way that SDE as a philosophy is set up, because it's so personalized, nobody's experience with self-directed education is going to look the same. I think that everybody can find themselves in being 100% SDE. It's just going to look different for everybody. So I think there's certain aspects of school as an institution which you can carry over into SDE. For example, schedules are something that we associate with school, but the schoolish aspect is feeling like you need to have that in order for what you're doing to be acceptable. So I think SDE can work for everybody, but it is definitely a lifelong transition period.
Yeah. Do you think that schoolishness is in any way intentional, that it's imposed through schooling?
Hmm. Hmm. I love these questions. I think to some extent, I mean, I would say so. I think that it was initially placed for as a way for adults to, their intention was to help young people, right? To help them get the skills that they feel they're going to need. But it was also, it also came from a it has roots in adultism, right? Feeling their ageism, excuse me, feeling like young people should be seen and not heard, or we are bestowing our wisdom upon young people when it's not as black and white as that. And I think one of the aspects of schoolishness, that authoritarian mindset, is one that was very much passed down between the relationship that we have currently as adult and child. So I think there are some aspects of it that can be intentional, but I think a lot of them are also just what we as a society have deemed normal ways to treat young people.
When our youngest daughter took an AP World History class, I
Mm.
had to do the reading with her each night because it was a very difficult class. And as I read the textbook, I realized that the history of the world is a history of power and control.
Yep.
So it might seem that schoolishness is attractive, maybe not always intentional, but easy to fall into.
Yes. Yes. I would definitely agree with that assessment because it's just I like schoolishness is not even a thing that is just in school, just like how SDE, even though it's self-directed education, is not only in education. The idea or the attitudes of schoolishness are so pervasive throughout our larger culture because they tie in with power. And as you said, we're a very power-oriented culture. So I think absolutely, no matter where you turn, there's always going to be some aspect of schoolishness that is pushing back on whatever you may be trying to do in SDE.
Did you ever read Ivan Illich, Deschooling Society?
I haven't. Sounds interesting.
I think he makes the point that our social institutions mirror the
Mm.
schoolishness that we learn in school. And he makes the further argument that institutions end up perpetuating the problems they were designed to solve.
Mm.
So I guess if you thought about that with regard to school, you'd say, in an intriguing way, schools produce people who think they're not good learners rather than good learners.
Yes. Yes, definitely. I talk about this with my family all the time, like this sort of pipeline for how school is meant to make good workers, right? And in our capitalist society, right, good workers are people who don't necessarily have a vested interest in or like they don't have the space to talk about how they want to learn. Like like for example, the rates of people unionizing are down by a lot. And I think that part of the reason for that is that when you're in school, you are indoctrinated into a sort of mindset where that's not necessary. You don't need to stand up for your personal rights if you have good grades. Like that sort of thinking where it's like a zero sum game. Are you good or are you not? That sort of thing is really pervasive.
Do you have friends that you feel like have been wounded by their school experiences?
Yes. I think every single person I know has been. My friends, I gave the example on the Fair of the Free Child podcast where I was talking about my friends with like financial, what is the word? Financial confidence. So when we go out to eat or talking about their credit cards and things like that, like they don't have a good grasp on what a credit card looks like and how to keep your credit score at a good level, even though these are people that are moving into college now, right? So according to our schoolish minds, then they should obviously be ready to take on the world, but there are so many, in my mind, basic things for adult life that they're just not prepared for. And I think a schoolish mind really puts you on the one track that academia is everything. And so you don't have time and you're not encouraged to look outside of that and figure out how you want to operate in the world as a person.
So, Marley, in your interview, you talk about how people were reacting when they made a mistake. So maybe they bought something that they wish they hadn't,
Mhm.
and that was somehow associated with schoolishness.
Yes.
Could you
So
describe that?
I feel, oh, yes. So I feel like school, I mean, just thinking about the way that we structure our tests, we most definitely punish mistakes. And what I mean by that is not saying that, oh, I made a mistake, that's a bad thing. That can be a really useful thing, a really useful thing to think about why you made the mistake that you did, but sort of putting your self-worth on the mistakes that you make rather than using them as an opportunity to move forward. So I did pretty good when I was in school. You know, I was like a quote unquote gifted student, but I used to get like one or two questions wrong per test, and it messed with me for days because I felt like, oh, well, you know, if I know the content, then why'd I miss a question? Like, am I stupid or something? Can I not write it down properly? So I think that the schoolish way to look at making a mistake is very much one of self deprecation, whereas a self directed approach would be you made a mistake. You can sit with how you're feeling about making that mistake and what can you learn from it? And how do you want to move forward? Like, I think the big thing is a feeling of guilt. In SDE, we try our best to mitigate that. Like there's no need to feel guilty for your learning process, whereas school is all about putting people down.
Is that what you mean when you talk about being able to think deeper than your reaction?
Yes. So at SDE, as I said, it's not just about education. It is also very much about emotions and emotional intelligence and the ability to process how you're feeling, because that's going to inform all your other decisions, right? So we have schools where, well, most schools, I think, where your emotions aren't really a factor. You know, like say you're taking a test and it's just been a really bad day. Even if you could um, even if you couldn't retake it, you could still know that you're not in the right mindset to take that test. I think school doesn't give you the opportunity to, I say, like I used to say, I wasn't able to think my thoughts. And what that means is that you don't have the time to just examine yourself. You have to push all of that down in order to be a good student, right? You're putting your studenthood over your personhood. And SDE is really about breaking that barrier down and thinking about what it even means to be a student if you're constantly learning things, not just when you're in a classroom. So, emotional intelligence is going to be a huge part of how you learn. So, why should that not play a part in what you do?
Do you think there's a rhythm to learning? And is it different than sort of structured time schedules?
Hmm. So, I think because SDE can be so varied, the term rhythm is like, yeah, I do think there's a rhythm. It's just not how we would normally think of it. So everybody has their different rhythm. For me, I am naturally a structured person. I like to look at charts and tables and numbers and all that. It helps me feel confident in what I'm doing and not overthink. Whereas someone like my mom or my sister, they're much more go with the flow type people. So they're very clear on what they want to do as well. It's just if you tried to have them put it out on a schedule, right, it'd be very strange for them. So I think that rhythm, when we talk about rhythm in SDE, that would more so be a confidence in what you're doing with your day to day, your week to week, as opposed to being able to show somebody if they ask you.
It seems like we all have to find our own personal rhythm, which is hard if there's an imposed
Yes.
structure.
Yes.
When does an imposed structure help? Does it ever?
Mm, so I think I always think like I'm a good example for people who take a lot of aspects of school, but then use them in a self-directed way. Because for me, an imposed structure does often help. I like to have, like I was giving the example of tutoring, I like having tutors. I like having instructors, you know, people who give me homework and things like that. I find it helpful, but other people may not. So I think the huge difference when we want to implement things that we associate with school into a self-directed space or into someone who's practicing being SDE minded is the level of trust and who has the power as well. So I use the example of my parents, right? There was a time when my mom and a teacher that I was working with, they developed a curriculum for me that was supposed to prepare me for college. It was 3 months, and I had all like my little syllabus set up. And even though I was the person that came to them and trusted them to hold that space for me to try out that syllabus, I was super, it was really difficult for me. So in a schoolish mindset, if someone had a syllabus for 3 months and they found it very frustrating, a little stressful, like the power would be in the hands of the teachers to be like, well, I don't really care, get it done, do what you need to do, even at the expense of your health, right? Whereas for me, when I had that syllabus implemented, it was my choice and my trust in the people that I wanted to help me with that. So yeah, I think there are instances in where you can implement things that are conventionally associated with school into an SDE minded space, but it is about who you're trusting with what you're implementing and who has the power in it. Is it the person who is teaching and therefore they have all the power, or is it the person who is trying to learn something?
It does seem like a good mentor is able to balance
Hmm.
the freedom of learning with some moments of challenging. I sense your mom does that.
Yes. I'm sorry, you cut out.
Uh,
Can you repeat that for
I
me?
sense that your mom knows or tries that to make that balance.
Yes, definitely. My mom is super great about that. I tag her in as much as I feel comfortable with when it comes to really holding space because we've been together since I was born. So she has a good idea of how I learn and what things can be pushed. And I trust her to know which boundaries are set in stone and which ones we can challenge a little bit. But that's a relationship that's been developed over time. And I think, as you said, that is the mark of a good mentor, someone who the person who is being taught can really trust that they're going to respect their boundaries while also knowing when to push.
So, a question I like to ask students is if they could reinvent school, what would they do? The question I would want to ask you is if you could reinvent
Mm.
school, would you? Should there even be formal schooling?
Oh my. uh, I think, I think there should be. I think there's sometimes, but it's less a school and more of a collective. So it's more a group of people who want to learn something and a group of people who are able to teach that thing getting together to just exchange that information and make their groups and their projects and their syllabuses as they see fit, um, as opposed to what we have now, which is like, again, I just feel like top down is the easiest way to describe it. There is no input from the people that are there to learn. It's a very compulsory thing to send young people to school. Whereas if I were to reinvent school, I think it would be tailored to specific things. So, a performing arts school, a science school, and we have these things now, but they're locked behind a paywall, or they're college majors. They're very There's not a lot of time that young people get to really explore which place they want to go. Whereas if I were to reinvent the idea of school, it would be from the very beginning. You get to shop around and figure out what you really like. And only, making groups of passionate people, I think, is the most important thing.
So, there are a number of students and parents right now who are struggling to figure out what to do while the student is at home.
Mm.
What advice would you give them?
Mm. I think I think one of the first things that can be done right now, right, is honest communication. And I talk about this a lot because for a lot of people, the idea of SDE, the idea of the kids being out of school and just, going with the flow, that's like a really, it's a really privileged take. They're like, oh, well, I have work, I have a lot of responsibilities, and I have to just make sure that my kid is somewhere. And so even for people who are in that position, I think one of the easiest things you can do is to have communication. So I understand, like, I use the example of my parents when I would want to wear something. I was working somewhere, and they were like, oh, well, we can't have you wearing that because they gave me the explanation. But at the end of the day, it was my choice, if that makes sense. The point of having that communication is so that even if you make a choice that is not self-directed for whatever reason, the young person you're talking to can still have context. That sort of context is something that we don't afford young people a lot. And I think it really breaks down the barrier of trust that can be between a young person and their parent when they don't even know why they're doing what they do.
It makes me think of parents as partners.
Mm.
Thank you, Marley.
Yes, thank you.